Okay, so hopefully, her basic description was beneficial, and you hopefully picked up on the part where she slowed down and said it twice that I'm going to be reacting to. She said it does not prevent implantation. She said it does not induce an abortion. So here is a segment out of this paper, Intrauterine Devices, a Review, out of the Research Journal of Pharmaceutical Dosage Forms and Technology, and was just published this year. And it says it prevents pregnancy by stopping sperm from reaching an egg and changes the lining of the uterus so an egg does not implant in the lining if it has been fertilized. So these hormonal methods and these disruptive methods are both taking the approach that our first line of defense is to prevent ovulation. That's our goal. Our second line of defense is to build a mucus layer or other routes of hostility. If you're using the copper T kind of design, there's other kinds of hostility, but we're going to try and keep sperm from making it up the fallopian tubes. So we want to inhibit ovulation. We want to keep the sperm from even getting up there in case there is an ovulation. And then our third and final line of defense is if ovulation were to happen and sperm were to get past our barriers so that fertilization occurs, our final defense is to disrupt the lining of the uterus so that an egg can't implant into that and it gets just passed through. So again, there's the people who are saying something else have different motives, and my motive is to just make sure that you guys know how things work. So I think that video was called How Stuff Works, so it just kind of feels like they should say how stuff works. Anyway, sorry. Told you I wasn't a YouTuber, didn't I? I definitely would not produce quite the same things. So the effectiveness of IUDs, theoretical and actual use, it's about 1% of women will become pregnant while using this method. And this includes the few women who will actually end up with what are called ectopic pregnancies, pregnancies that lodge in the fallopian tubes. So that includes women in those conditions. That paper that I cited on the previous slide talked about how about 5% of women using IUDs will end up with an ectopic pregnancy. That about 25% of women will end up with a fertilized egg that implants but spontaneously aborts at some point during that time. And if you remove the IUD as soon as a pregnancy is recognized, then you can reduce the spontaneous abortion rate down to about 12.5%. So, there's some numbers associated with some failures, but I think I might have said 25% of women become pregnant. I'm saying of the women who become pregnant, this 1%, 25% of them. So of the 1% who become pregnant, 25% of them will have an implantation that results in a spontaneous abortion, and you can reduce that spontaneous abortion by removing the IUD in time. Okay, so I think I left out the 25% of the 1% in my original statement there. So the correct use of an IUD is to check for the string every month. If you're not having periods, because a lot of women report that ultimately their periods go away, you just have to decide on a day every month that is string checking time and make sure that that string is still present. If you can't feel it, it could indicate that the IUD is sort of one of those arms of it is working its way up a fallopian tube. Usually that will be associated with significant pain. Or that it's starting to work its way into the uterine lining, which again usually will be associated with pain. So usually the string check is sort of on top of also being aware of sensations in the pelvic region. The advantage is really the same as all the other long-term options that we've talked about. The simplicity and all those kinds of things. Using the hormonal version of the IUD adds the benefits that are associated with hormones. Using the copper IUD has the benefit of being hormonal free and yet still really effective. The disadvantages, not everybody is a good candidate for this. There's been a really big push in the US lately to basically use IUDs as the first line of birth control for all women who are becoming sexually active. It's not suitable for everyone. It really can increase the risk of pelvic inflammatory disease, which is what PID stands for. It is IUDs are better for women who have fewer partners. So it wouldn't be a great birth control technique for a sex worker or somebody who has contact with lots of different sexual partners, because the presence of the strings that are coming out of the cervix and things like that give an opportunity for bacteria to be brought up into the reproductive tract a lot easier. So it's really a better option for women who have limited sexual partners, or a single sexual partner. It does increase the risk of ectopic pregnancy, a fertilized egg that implants in the fallopian tube. And the outcome of an ectopic pregnancy is rupture of the fallopian tube and loss of fertility on that side. So you're going to have basically half the fertility if an ectopic pregnancy occurs. So it's not something that a person would want to have happen. It also can increase the risk of heavy bleeding. And if a woman is using an IUD and starts having heavy bleeding, she really needs to have it checked out because of the possibility that there's perforation of the uterus. So anytime there's heavy bleeding present, it needs to be checked out by a doctor. All right, we're on our final topic. Yeah, this is it. Voluntary surgical contraception. Now, you might be wondering, why do you have to put voluntary at the front? We don't do involuntary surgical contraception anymore in this country. We used to. Certain people were determined that they shouldn't be allowed to reproduce, and they would involuntarily sterilize them. Now we are talking about voluntary surgical contraception. So a person has to decide that they want to have, for example, a tubal ligation. So in a woman, the fallopian tubes can be severed, ligated, and then you tie them off, or you insert some glue stoppers into them, or something. The goal being to prevent sperm from making it up the fallopian tubes to meet the eggs that are still going to be released every month, because nothing is being done to interfere with ovulation or any of the normal hormonal patterns. It's just preventing sperm from getting to eggs. Tubal occlusion has the same goal, and in tubal occlusion, some kind of object. This picture that I'm showing is from a device that's no longer on the market because it was perforating women's fallopian tubes and causing really bad problems. But there are different devices that can be inserted into the fallopian tube to occlude it. The idea is you put something in there and scar tissue will grow around it and ultimately block off those tubes. Vasectomy, we talked about this a little bit in chapter 2, that the vas deferens is that tube that carries sperm from the epididymis up to, the seminal vesicle and ultimately for ejaculation. And so if we sever the vas deferens, then the sperm can't exit the body. The sperm are still created. All the hormonal patterns are all still exactly the same. It's just that the sperm can't get out. So don't forget that with ejaculation, the sperm only makes up about 1% of the volume. So all of those fluids that are still coming from the prostate gland and the seminal vesicle, all of those are still being produced and still producing the normal volume of ejaculate. It's just that the sperm can't get out. So it's after recovery from vasectomy, most men don't report any changes in the volume or the sensations associated with ejaculation. The recovery from vasectomy is really quick. They call it a no scalpel vasectomy these days, where I don't know exactly. So you're not using a scalpel, you're using something to provide a little bit of an opening in the back of the scrotum, and then those vas deferens are pulled out and they're either severed and tied off, or they're pinched and tied off, or glue is inserted, or something is done to make sure that sperm can't get past. And then a lot of times in the no surgery type, you don't have even stitches afterwards. So it's a really quick recovery. A lot of women who have tubal ligations, they're going to have, if they're doing it separate from childbirth, a lot of women who are having a C-section will have a tubal ligation at the same time, so they can sort of have one big thing. But if you're doing it separate from childbirth, it's usually done laparoscopically with an opening through the belly button. But for the doctor to be able to see what they're doing and stuff, they have to put some air into that cavity so that they can see. And so there can be some side effects with the tubal ligation that you don't usually see with the vasectomy. So the effectiveness, depending on which route you go, the numbers may slightly vary, but notice that this is, these are basically, if you wanted to convert it, tubal ligation, it's like 5 out of 10,000 women will become pregnant in a year after having a tubal ligation. Tubal occlusion, it's 3 out of 10,000. For men, 2 out of 10,000 men will, their partner will become pregnant within a year after a vasectomy. The correct use, with vasectomy, there's some really like clear markers for when it's safe to resume unprotected sex that aren't quite as clear for tubal ligation or tubal occlusion. With vasectomy, you want to make sure that there have been at least 10 ejaculations since the surgery before you would have any kind of unprotected sex. And this is not an or, this is an and. So you've had at least 10 ejaculations and you have your semen sample analyzed for, the absence of semen or sperm. You want to make sure that you've done both of those. I had a student a number of years ago who, he said their first child was conceived with a condom failure. Their second child was conceived while his wife was on the pill. And their third child was conceived right after he had a vasectomy and had not done the 10 ejaculations and semen sample analysis. And so he's like, okay, but now it really is, now I'm really sterilized and no more kids. But they kept trying to plan their family and everything kept failing. And that happens, right? Unfortunately, if it's not in your plan, it can be quite devastating, but it's, with the vasectomy, this is really nice because you have these really clear markers that it's actually worked and you're clear to go. With tubal ligation and tubal occlusion, we don't have anything quite as clear cut. So they, once you've recovered from the surgery, you are considered okay to resume sexual activity. With tubal occlusion, they may tell you to wait a certain amount of time to make sure that the scar tissue has grown, but it's a lot less clear for the tubal ligation situations. The advantages, of course, any long-term option has these benefits. This has the added benefit of being permanent. So that if a person literally knows that children are not part of their future, any future children, they don't want them. That is, the completely foolproof way to make sure that for the rest of their life, they will not conceive any more children. The disadvantage is that it's permanent. And so sometimes people make that decision and then later wish they hadn't made that decision. And so it's really super important for people to realize you should not rely on reversal. While it is possible for some people to have these surgeries reversed and they've been successful and been able to have children afterwards, it should not be looked at it like that because, for example, with the vasectomy, the vas deferens, when it's severed, could retract up into the abdomen, and now we have to go find it and bring it back together. And we've lost some of the length, right? Because we damaged it when we cut it and did whatever we did to block it off. And so that part has to be removed. And now we have to attach it. So now the testicles are held closer to the body than they normally would have been held. And so now we have an elevated temperature in the testicles, which might actually interfere with fertility and a whole bunch of things. A person should only look at voluntary surgical contraception as an option when they know that absolutely nothing could possibly happen in this world that would ever make them want to have any more children or any children at all. They should not rely on sperm banking because we have had how many cases of sperm banks that have lost power and all the sperm went bad and things like that. Like I've heard arguments where everybody should get sterilized and bank their gametes, and then when they're ready to have children, then we would do it medically. That all sounds great, assuming everything goes perfectly, and the probability that people who are handling your gametes for you are going to handle them perfectly is not 100%. So we would not want to necessarily rely on sperm banking. And then we wouldn't want to rely on, sperm retrieval or egg retrieval and then in vitro fertilization for one really simple reason, expense. For another really simple reason that, those procedures are very hard on the body and you wouldn't want to go through them if you didn't have to. So voluntary surgical contraception should be used as, literally it is permanent. I am never going to want to conceive another or any or whatever the situation is, children. All right. That concludes all the different ways that we can prevent conception and or prevent birth. So I will see you guys in the next chapter.